I am here today with Tori Miller Liu. Tori is the president and CEO of the Association for Intelligent Information Management, or AIM. She was previously the CIO of the American Speech, Language, and Hearing Association. Tori holds an MBA and is a certified association executive. She was named a fellow of the American Society of Association Executives in 2023. And Tori is with me today to talk about the strategic importance of preserving and protecting high value, long term data and content. And look, this is an important topic as more and more executives recognize the need to prioritize proper archiving and governance of long term content over time to avoid potential issues like data loss, compliance violations, or operational disruptions. So, Tori, welcome aboard. Thank you for being with me today. Let's dig into this topic a little bit. Why should the preservation and protection of high value long term data and information be a strategic priority for executives today? What are the risks of not prioritizing this?
Well, thanks for having me on the podcast, Kevin. I think first that comes to mind is compliance. Everyone usually thinks of compliance when you think about high value data or information. And while I do think compliance and with regulations and standards is vitally important, there's value beyond that compliance, right? And so we often talk about um, information that goes even beyond transactional information. And I usually think of transactional information like contracts. Contracts are high value documents. We want to save those. We want to preserve those. It's important for legal reasons. But even beyond that, you have information that captures the history with your customer or a vendor. It provides really important context to the relationships that we build with other entities, with individuals. And that kind of context allows you to better serve those parties or partner with those parties. There's also information like original designs or schematics or governance documents. Again, all of those provide context for projects and entities that are important to us from a not just a historical perspective, but what we do in the future, because history should inform the decisions that we make today and tomorrow, right? So I think all of that to say information provides institutional knowledge and context. And if we lose it, we jeopardize our ability to make decisions or
Mm.
provide exceptional service. And these days, you also are losing really valuable input for AI. So there's a lot of reasons to keep that stuff around.
And we're talking about data that is retained 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 50 years from now, even. And so what you're saying is beyond the compliance aspects of it, which we'll talk a little bit more about. It's really also about business intelligence and using information in ways that can be profitable or useful for the organization as an organization. Is that about right?
Yeah. You can calculate the value of structured data or unstructured data. There's basic ROI formulas that you can use to think about the cost, the benefits of that data minus the cost of managing the data over the
Mm.
cost of managing that data, and you can get a sense of what that data value is. And I would say that most high value data is going to have a pretty high ROI.
So there are calculations. Can you recommend a resource to us to learn more about how we might use those calculations?
You can always go onto the AIMS website, which is aiim.org. We definitely have some knowledge about that. We are also good friends with DAMA International, which is the Data Management Association, and they provide certification for data managers, but also have a lot of intel on calculating data value and data governance, which I always
Hmm.
appreciate.
So from this aspect, do you believe that long-term content archiving is overlooked from this point of view? Not just the compliance point of view, but overlooked in terms of its value to the organization, like you're discussing?
Um, I think it depends on the entity. I actually think while people bash government, federal and state government often, I think they're really perfect case studies for what you get when you value high value content, right?
Mm.
Usually, like at least in the US, they have to keep a lot of that information to comply with the Freedom of Information Act. But you can see the results that they get because of it. They're able to create like digital archives where people can access records from years and years ago, not just for
Right.
research needs, but for making decisions about what happens to cities? How do we better serve underprivileged populations? Like there's so many uses for that kind of information. And government is a really nice example of what you can get out of it.
Indeed, you can access business information from pre pre-Revolutionary War in America,
Yeah.
that is still in the American archives here in the U.S. All right, now as the digital landscape evolves, how have the risks and challenges related to long-term archiving changed in your view? Can you share some examples of organizations that have faced significant issues because they failed to adapt?
Well, I'm going to share one from my own history because, as you mentioned, I was formerly a chief information officer. So we actually were in a situation where we intentionally left some human resource data on an old on-premise server, and it really wasn't a problem until it actually was. The system got deprecated. We could no longer upgrade it. That impacted the accessibility of the data that was on that server. And so when you get in a situation where it wasn't data that HR needed all the time, but they did need it occasionally. And when they did, there was a really good reason for it. It was connected to retirement benefits and distribution, and calculating employee tenures. And it was impeding their work not being able to access that data. So
Mm.
that was the example that came to mind as soon as I saw that question.
Well, this is a real world example where the proper protection or not proper protection and archiving of high value permanent information resulted in a in a conundrum for the organization. Can you give us
Yeah.
an example, say from a CIO's perspective, of a significant benefit or value for an organization and how we might realize that value?
Yeah, so I think one example that I love because way back when I actually did some museum studies and studied historic preservation, so I'm always very interested in what's happening in the museum world and the art world, and um,
Mm.
the a lot of museums have actually digitized their collections, and so the British Library is actually one really good example. They've digitized about 1,000 of their manuscripts, and we're talking about like priceless manuscripts, Bibles from the 15th century, 16th century. And they're not just an important part of British history, but they're an important part of world history. And they're accessible online and they're accessible to society at large. So I know that that's not necessarily a value that results in direct revenues to an organization, but I think there's inherent value to people because they've digitized those records.
We are here today with Tori Miller Liu, President and CEO of the Association for Intelligent Information Management, or AIM, and we're here talking about the importance of preserving and protecting high value long term data and content. Now, Tori, let's talk about modern technologies such as cloud based archiving and AI. How do they fit into the strategic agenda of preserving long term information? What role does governance play in this and ensuring that these technologies are used effectively?
I mean, there's tons of literature that you can find online about the value of cloud-based archiving. But as with any cloud-based solution, what you're getting really off the shelf is something that's scalable, that's accessible, and protected. As in there's backup for that information and data. I've been in IT positions where we've had on-premise servers, or we've been managing our own cloud-based server, and you have to devote time and staff and resources to that. So there's a lot of good reasons to outsource that kind of work, especially if you're trying to reduce staff costs or you want your network engineers to focus on something that might be actually of higher value than managing an on-prem server. Um, Now, cloud-based servers, you're not off the hook for good governance. So you want good governance in place to be effective and safe. And it's important to work with your vendors and your staff to make sure that's in place. So you have clear policies about retention, you have very evident access controls and appropriate permissions. You're regularly auditing those cloud-based systems, and you're also doing some training for staff. And
Mhm.
ideally, the vendor that you're working with is going to help provide that kind of training and help walk through how you implement your own governance policies in the platform.
So, what should I do as an executive? I mean, I can see different schools of thought on this. It's like, if I'm thinking about long-term archiving 10, 20, 30, 50, hundreds of years even perhaps, I might be tempted to just delete everything after a certain period and just get rid of it all, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Or I might be tempted to just save everything, right? Which may not be a good thing to do either. What strategies would you recommend to organizations that are thinking about this? How do I determine what I should keep and what I shouldn't keep?
You can connect the value of your information directly to your strategy. So that's where I would start first. Figure out what is my strategy, not just for this year, but my multi-year strategy, my multi-year mission, and that can help you identify what information is important to your organization. From there, you can get more granular about, okay, I've identified, for instance, as an executive in an association, I have identified that maintaining minutes for our board meetings is important. It's important for compliance reasons,
Mhm.
but it's also important for documenting key decisions that have been made in the history of my organization. I, as an executive, though, need to have a conversation with my board and my staff about how long do we actually need to keep those minutes from a compliance standpoint, but also from a usefulness standpoint.
Mhm.
There is kind of like a rule of thumb that most users don't access data that's over 2 years old. Um, I would kind of pick that rule of thumb apart a little bit though and think about, well, okay, maybe you're not accessing that data on a regular basis, but what are the types of decisions that might prompt me, for instance, to access minutes from my organization, from our board of director meetings? My guess is if I'm accessing those minutes, it's for a pretty critical reason. Maybe it's a legal
Right.
issue, or maybe it's I need to find a paper trail of key decisions we made about our annual event, for instance, because I have the board asking. So I think if you can play out those scenarios after you identify how do I align my information value with my strategy, then play out the scenarios and questions that might come up related to that information. And that can kind of give you a sense of the probability of needing that information, and the risk also of not having that information.
And how long will you keep those meeting minutes for AIM?
Forever.
Forever.
They're governance documents for us, and the cost of
Okay.
storing them for us pretty minimal because you're talking about 5 to 7 documents a year, so such a
Right.
small footprint. So there's very little cost associated with it, and we will store them forever.
Well, then the question I have then is in what format will you store those? I mean, many organizations are still relying on legacy systems or even physical media for archiving. So what format will you keep those meeting minutes in? Will you physically print those off? I mean, to keep them forever, or as formats of different data formats evolve over time, how will you manage that evolution of the formats? I mean, we have a risk of that data becoming obsolete or unreadable over time. What are your strategies
Absolutely.
there?
For us, we do backup. Everything's cloud-based. So all those documents that I mentioned, the minutes are in the cloud, but we have backup, and not just through the platform that's hosting our cloud storage, but there's additional redundant backup beyond that. And also, as soon as the minutes are approved, they are converted into PDF, which is a more sustainable format for documents of that
Hmm.
nature.
Is that where most folks are going in terms of long-term archiving into a PDF?
PDFs, I think, are kind of like the gold standard. There's literally a PDF group that we work closely with that has standardized
Mhm.
PDFs, and so that's why for long-term storage, PDFs are often the recommended format because it's standardized, it's convertible and readable by many, many, many different software platforms. It's not bespoke.
Mhm.
It's a universal format. So it doesn't have to be PDF, but I think talk to your IT team and talk to your vendors about what are
Right.
the universal formats that we think are going to be most pervasive over time.
Well, it's an important thing to think about and consider, especially over time, and maybe needs to be revisited over years. Now,
Mhm.
like you said, with your IT team, your own strategies, and your provider, someone like Preservica, for example, is
Yep.
already tuned into this idea of obsolescence of formats. So it's definitely part of the strategy. The longer term you go, the more important that becomes, it would seem to me. What advice would you give executives who are hesitant to invest in proper information preservation strategies long term? How can they quantify the actual ROI or the long term benefits of making this a priority in their organization?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, like they shouldn't feel like they have to do that calculation on their own. I think you can lean on your information management professionals that work within your organization and your IT team and the vendor themselves to sort of prove the value of storing that information. But from there, you can, we talked a little bit about like calculations that you can run through, like calculating data value or calculating cost to store or the cost over time of storing information. You can run calculations like that to just get like some back of napkin math on what is the value of this information. But at the end of the day, it really does come down to strategy. Your information preservation strategy should be directly aligned with your
Mm,
strategy. So if there are pieces of data and documents that support your decision making around your organization's strategy, that's where you should target the information that you store. And that's where you should be having the questions about, okay, well, what's the value of this information? What's the value of this information over time? It may, it's kind of like a car that's rolling off the lot. It's going to depreciate in value, right? But there are certain circumstances where, that it was a Rolls Royce, so it's going to be valuable for like 20 years, right? It's not going
right.
to depreciate as quickly. So you can start having conversations about that, and you can start small too. I would immediately push back on any vendor or IT professional that comes to me and says, okay, we're going to implement a long-term preservation strategy and we're going to do it for everything all at once. No, we can
Right.
start small. We can start with small projects, high value projects, especially projects that are connected to AI right now. I think AI is giving us a really beautiful on-ramp for taking bite-sized chunks out of information governance problems.
What about AI and training AI with information and the ethical aspects of it, or even the profit aspects of it? Information used to train AI models is valuable. What is your advice for organizations that may have a long-term archive that's sitting there? Maybe it's valuable to them, maybe it's not, maybe they've got it tucked away. They don't know what they're doing with it, but it is an asset that can be used for that may be profitable. What's your advice for organizations considering using their information archive to train AI models commercially?
Well, and it's so funny how generative AI has kind of reconfigured the information value calculation, right? Like it has actually elevated the value of information because all of a sudden we can say, I'll use my minutes as an example. Um,
Right.
the minutes were useful from a compliance standpoint and from, if I ever needed to do research on key decisions. But now with AI, there are use cases where I can feed my minutes to protected protected enterprise level AI engine, and I can communicate with with a chat GPT and ask it specific questions about minutes, and I don't have to go digging. So
Right.
that's a calculation on time saving. I can have AI summarize minutes from the past 10 years where decisions were related to our annual event, for instance, and I don't have to go looking for that. And that is hard and fast cost savings because I have an hourly rate, and all of a sudden, what might have taken me 2 days, I could complete in 30 minutes or less.
Right, or a project that you would not have done in the past. It simply would have been too
Yeah.
complex, or you just wouldn't have done it. Now you can and really leverage that ability in ways that we never could do
Yes.
before.
Because sometimes there's just I mean, the minutes that's not that many minutes. And we're um,
Right.
44 years old. It's not that many. But there are data sets where the data volume is beyond human capacity to digest that
Right.
AI can now help us with.
Right. We are here today with Tori Miller Liu, and we're talking about long-term archiving of information. Now, Tori, we've reached the action item round of the program. I'm wondering if you could please provide us with three quick action items that our viewers can do to take advantage of your ideas and advice.
Okay, I got three. First, identify your high value data across your organization. Doesn't mean you have to do something with it right away, but I think take an inventory of what you got and make sure you're looking at shadow IT or the dark data that's within shadow IT. Second is assess the quality and sustainability of your storage and retention solutions. So you don't have an instance like I did with my HR data. Um, And then finally, of course, because I'm the president and CEO of AIM, I always think you should figure out a way to invest in information management, which includes long-term preservation strategies. But we've talked so much about different solutions today. I think it's really important to take a more holistic look at intelligent information management, which AIM defines as a practice that integrates people, processes, technology, and information to achieve better business outcomes. So look at that entire program and a package to figure out how you can get the most out of your information.
Tori, it's been great speaking with you today. We're almost out of time, but before I let you go, one last question. What should executives, technologists, all of us really, be thinking about today and strategizing for in order to be prepared for the world in 5 years' time?
I think we should develop plans to help us better manage information and a way to deploy those plans in bite-sized chunks. You don't need to do it all at once. So I think AI projects have given us such a great opportunity to say, okay, here's a discrete AI project that I need. There is a discrete set of data and information that goes along with that AI project. That's an opportunity to improve the quality and security of that data in a small, reduced scope way, which I think is a lot more cost effective and frankly a lot more digestible than saying we're gonna apply information governance across our entire enterprise and we're gonna clean all of our data all at once. That can be really overwhelming to organizations of any size. So take things in phased approaches, but be ready to do it. So if an opportunity arises to improve data, improve information, whether it's from a security or storage or a cleanliness standpoint, make sure you're not
Hmm.
riding by, that you're actually taking the opportunity to do that.
That is Tori Miller Liu, CEO and President of the Association for Intelligent Information Management. You can find Tori and find out more at aim.org. That's AIIM.org. Tori, it's been great speaking with you today. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate it.